All right, so thank you so much for those who are joining us tonight. We are going to wait just a few minutes to get started so that we can let people settle in. We can let people see the link. As I was right now, a few minutes ago, desperately looking for it, making sure that I was going to the right place. So thank you so much again for joining us. And I want to say a special thank you to the team of TheDream.Us who is here with us tonight as well. Special thanks to Sadhana who set this up for us tonight, and Melanie who is going to be answering and helping us with the questions that are going to be asked today. So we'll just wait a few more seconds and let people who are in the waiting room and who are joining us in. And we have tonight over 80 people joining us from different parts of the country. To those who are in freezing weather and are struggling because of the weather, we're so sorry that is happening. Myself, from Miami, Florida, I know too well what it is to be without power. Several years ago when there was a hurricane that passed by, I was without power for 10 days and it was quite some 10 days. So I empathize with those who don't have power today and are struggling with these really weird and freezing weather that we're seeing throughout the country passing by. And as we wait a few more seconds, we'll start at 7:05, let's say that. So everybody who is waiting, you have 2 minutes to get your glass of water, to settle in. And thank you so much for joining us. And tonight I'm going to be sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see the screen. And we're going to be talking about immigration and what's been happening since the new administration has come in. And we're going to talk, just want to let you all know that I am not an immigration attorney, but I've been doing immigrant rights work for now 16 years. And I don't claim to be an expert, but I have been able to share a lot of information from folks and learn a lot of what's been happening. And so I'm going to be sharing that information with you all tonight. If there are any questions that I'm not able to answer, we'll jot them down. And this session is being recorded. So just FYI for those of you who might be a little shy, we're recording this session so that we can send it off to our scholars afterwards, those that couldn't make it. But we would get started in just a few seconds. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, I want to say thank you to the team of TheDream.Us for being with us tonight. We have almost a full house, and we're really excited to have this presentation for you tonight. This presentation was brought because many of our scholars had many questions, and we wanted to make sure that we answer those questions for you all. And I wanted to, before starting, say a special thank you to Sadhana Singh for helping us put this presentation together, and for Melanie, who is going to be helping us with our questions that are going to be asked later tonight. So, and today, what we're going to talk about, the first thing is going to be the executive actions in Daca. We're going to talk about the immigration proposed legislations, the vehicles and realities of legislation passing, and what you can do to ensure that we can get things done. And then we'll end with the Q&A session. So I'm not going to review all the executive actions because there's actually, this is just a couple of them that have been passed or introduced, or the executive branch of our government, meaning the president, put together these executive actions and orders. And practically what happens with these is that he dictates to the Department of Homeland Security or whoever agency this is going to go to that certain actions have to happen. And I just wanted to show you a few of them because there's actually over 20 executive actions that have happened in the course of the last 30 days or so that he's been in office. And these are executive orders and memorandums that the president has proclaimed by his executive authority. And so, for example, there was one that gave deferred enforcement departure for people from Liberia. And that is similar to TPS, temporary protective status. It's a status that defers the enforcement, which is the deportation of certain individuals from Liberia. He was able to grant that on day one of his presidency on January 20th. It was one of the presidential memorandums that he signed. The other thing that he has done is on asylum. He is putting together a task force to help families reunite. As you can probably remember, during the last 4 years of the Trump administration, we got a lot of enforcement. And one of the things that we saw was children in cages and children and families being separated. And so through executive action, the new president, President Biden, has put together a task force to try to bring those families together and put our asylum structure back into how it used to be. And so here I wanted to just show you some of those executive actions. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of them because there's a lot to talk about here, but I just wanted to put this in front of you because it's not like things are going to happen from one day to another, and it's not like things are going to magically get better from one administration to the other. As you can all remember, during the Obama administration, we had the largest numbers of deportation that we had ever seen in the history of the United States, and that was under a Democratic president. And then came the Trump administration, and then we started seeing not only more enforcement, but also policy changes happening through all the different agencies. And it took some time for him to be able to do that. The same way right now it's taking time for President Biden to undo some of those things that Trump did and try to help the immigrant community. So the one that we care about is the one of Daca and the future of Daca. So as you all know, Daca is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it's a program that many of you are under. And during the Daca period of times from June 15, 2012, when it was announced until today, the Daca program has seen litigation happen to it, has seen the Trump administration try to end the program. And we're still going through litigation. So it's really key and important that you understand and know what is happening to this program, especially if this program is what you're under. So on June 18, 2020, during the Trump administration, the US Supreme Court ruled that the DACA program can move forward. It didn't say if it was unconstitutional or not. It just said that it can just continue to move forward. And that ruling was something that many of us were really happy and excited about because we all thought that the DACA program was going to end as the Trump administration was trying to do so. But on December 4th, 2020, the US District Court for the Eastern District of New York said that the DACA program for those that could not apply for the first time could start doing so. And this is something that the Trump administration, through an executive action, executive memorandum, had done with the stroke of his pen to try to end the program for those who had not applied for it for the first time. And the district judge in New York said, no, the memorandum that came under the USCIS director during that time, he was only an acting director, therefore he does not have jurisdiction over this. So now those of you who did not get to apply for the first time could start applying for the first time. And why do I put this there and why am I mentioning it? Is because if you have not applied for DACA, it's really important that you do so as soon as possible because you have a window of opportunity to apply now. And then, of course, there's ongoing litigation that is happening and legal challenges to DACA in the Fifth Circuit, excuse me. And what that means is that there was 9 states that sued the federal government and said the federal government is injuring us, these states, because of the DACA program. And it's causing harm to our citizens. And so the Fifth Circuit, which is not such a friendly circuit, has heard the case, but nothing has been said about it. So we're still waiting to hear what this is going to happen. Now, I don't want you to worry about this because it doesn't necessarily mean that if we hear a ruling from this judge, Judge Haynen, that the DACA program is going to end. Our friends at MALDEF, at the Mexican American Legal and Defense Fund, have shared with us that there's going to be a process still. So even if he was to say something against DACA and say, yes, that is true, the reality is that there still will be a process before anything would happen to the DACA program. But here's the good news too. On January 20th, 2021, the president, through his presidential memorandum, fortified the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. That means that he undid everything that the Department of Homeland Security did during the Trump administration and said that it was consistent and applicable to law, and they preserved DACA as it stands. So that is good news for everyone who has DACA, because that means that now, before we didn't have an administration that was going to fight for DACA in the Fifth Circuit. Now we actually have an administration that could intervene and can say, no, actually the program has worked since 2012, since the time that people have been able to apply for this. It has not caused any harms to anybody else. And this program actually has worked. It's doing well. It's actually has helped many states. It's provided taxes. The people that's providing taxes is providing support system for our communities and our economy. So with the presidential elections and a new administration, we know that the DACA program is in a safer, better place. Now, the current status of DACA is that who can apply, the criteria is those, as you know, that came to the US before 2007 and have consistently lived here, were present on June 15, 2012 in the United States. And there's other criteria that you should go to the USCIS website to make sure that you're eligible for DACA. But for those who have DACA and have had DACA for a long time, it's important that you start renewing. The other thing that happened with this memo is that DACA went from being, during the Trump administration, from 3 to 2 years to 1 year. And then now it's back to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program being a 2-year program that protects the young people during that 2 year. The other thing that I want to say as a word of caution is that it's really important for you to keep your DACA in place, because we never know what legislation, and I'll talk about legislation in a little bit, what that's going to mean for you. There has been talks that if you have DACA, there might be an expedited process for you to get your citizenship or your green card. So it's important that you have your DACA so that in case there was to be some sort of legislation that comes into place, that you will be able to apply for this new status that would give you a faster route to green card and citizenship. Okay, so now let's talk about the proposed legislation. And one of the things that I'm going to do is gonna a little bit insert some of the information that I'm gonna talk about the vehicles and realities of legislation as I speak, just because they intertwine with one another. And so for the immigration proposed legislation, it's important for you to understand that there's gonna be a lot of legislations that are gonna be introduced, and there's been talk already of many of them. And the first one that we talked about, that we heard about, was the US Citizenship Act that has not been introduced just yet, neither in the House nor the Senate, but that this was the bill that is being backed by the President Biden. And in the House is going to be introduced by Representative Linda Sanchez of California, and is going to be introduced in the Senate by Senator Menendez of New Jersey. Why am I telling you who are the members of Congress that are going to be introducing this? Is because you probably are either in New Jersey or California. And that means that you become really important to the rest of the nation and to all of us as you start thinking about what can I do as a dreamer? What can I do as a scholar of TheDream.Us that wants to pass this legislation and want to move this forward? And I'll also talk about what you can do a little bit later in the slides. But going back to the legislation. So the US Citizenship Act of 2021 is the legislation, like I said, that is being backed by the president. And this is going to be his signature legislation on immigration. This is a comprehensive immigration bill, and it's a pretty progressive bill. It does not have any enforcement that we know of. And this is the bill that I was talking to you about that has an expedited path to green card to those that have Daca, TPS, and our agricultural workers. So it's really important that you also, if you are a temporary protective status individual, that as soon as you're eligible to reapply for that status, that you also do that so that you can maintain your status and so that you can also benefit if there was to be a legislation that passes like the US Citizenship Act of 2021. The other legislation that we've heard about and that we've talked about is the Dream and Promise Act, HR 6, that passed the House. Now, this legislation passed last year in the House, and there's probability that this legislation might be able to be moved quickly, or what they call an expedited way. They have until April to be able to reintroduce it and to try to move it in the House. And because it passed the House last year, it has a faster track where it doesn't have to go through the committee hearings to be able to come to the floor. So the good thing about the DREAM Act and Promise Act, HR 6, is that it encompasses not just dreamers that have DACA and would be eligible for the DREAM Act, but it also encompasses people with TPS. And so this legislation, like I said, passed last year, but it didn't pass the Senate. Now, the other legislation that is being introduced and was reintroduced again recently as of, I would say, 2 weeks, is the DREAM Act of 2021. And this is a bipartisan effort that is being led by Senator Durbin and Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He's the Republican on it. And as you know, the DREAM Act has been introduced since 2001. This is the legislation that we have seen over and over and over again. And that if any of you have been following legislations and have heard of the DREAM Act is a legislation that would only be for maybe 1.4 to 1.7 million people. And it would be those who followed under the DREAM Act criteria. Individuals who will not be eligible for the DREAM Act are people, for example, with TPS. So it's important for you to understand and know those things, because the other legislation that also got introduced that would legalize folks with TPS is the Secure Act. And the Secure Act was introduced last week, and the Secure Act will grant green cards to those that have TPS. There's also forthcoming possible legislations from gangs of, as we saw in 2013, there was a gang of 8. It was 8 members, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats that came together and said, we want to do some sort of legislation on immigration, and we want to move on that. So there's possibility and a potential for that to happen again. But right now it's still very new and it's still very fresh, so we do not necessarily know. Okay, so as I was mentioning to you before, there are vehicles, and the House, for example, has the expedited vehicle where HR 6, the House and the Promise Act of HR 6 can potentially go quickly, right? The other one is regular order, or the Marker Committee, which is how most legislations happen. If you remember listening to how a bill becomes a law, when you were a kid or watching it in your 8th grade government class, you remember that there was this markup committee or regular order where the bill has to go through different committees, pass those committees, then go to the Senate and then get voted on. And then in the House, it would go through the same process, go to the House and get voted on, and then come together and be voted on and decided and everything. If the legislations were the same, then that's when they become a law and they go to the president's desk. However, what it's really important for you to know is that both the expedited and regular order doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be able to get the necessary votes that we need. Because what you have to understand and know is that we have a very narrow majority, House majority for the Democrats, and a very narrow majority in the Senate as well. And just because we have more Democrats in the House and one more in the Senate doesn't necessarily mean that we have enough votes to be able to get legislation passed. Let me tell you and explain to you why. There are many Democrats that live in areas where they won by very narrow majority. And next year, they're going to have to run for re-election, which means that there's going to be a lot of votes that they're going to take, or that, for example, Speaker Pelosi is not going to have them take these votes because they're going to be very difficult votes for them, and they don't want to lose that majority. So that means that there's going to be some House Democrats who might not necessarily want to vote on immigration because those are hard votes for them to take. The same goes for the other barrier that we're going to potentially see, and we will see in the Senate, is the filibuster. Now, the filibuster is this rule that was made up that says that instead of having a simple majority, which means voting 50% plus 51 votes, that you need 60 votes in order to pass anything during the Senate. So any Republican, as we saw happening in 2010 when they filibustered the DREAM Act, can filibuster and say, I want, instead of the 50 plus 1 vote to pass any legislation, I want 60 votes. When that happens, that means that we need to find 10 Republicans in order to pass any legislation in the Senate. And finding 10 Republicans to vote with Democrats on anything, it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be extremely difficult to get 10 Republicans to vote on immigration legislation. Right now, we have Lindsey Graham as a co-sponsor of the DREAM Act, but that's just one. That means that we're still going to need 9 other Republicans in order to sign on to it. So it's going to be important to see who are the other 9 who are going to be crossing the aisle and voting with Democrats on immigration legislation. But historically, we have seen that we have not been able to move to get that enough votes to pass the filibuster rule. So I'm going to pause there because I've shared a lot, and this has been a lot of information and probably some stuff that is difficult to understand because of the processes that go on in our government. And you might think, it doesn't make any sense. Why are they filibustering something that might be good for us, or why are they playing politics with our lives? Well, reality is that this is how politics works, and this is how policy has been. And since I've been involved, we have not been able to pass any legislation through both chambers. We've been able to pass some through the House, pass some through the Senate, but never through both, where we successfully have been able to get any bills on immigration. So it's been a very frustrating time, but I want you to know that, things could happen. And just because we don't necessarily have a stronger majority in the House and the Senate to be able to get the votes that we need in order for something to become a law, doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to happen. There is a potential of happening, but the potential of happening is actually, very slim. And so how do we make sure that that slim margin becomes smaller, right? Or larger, whichever way you're looking at it, right? To make sure that we can get people to understand and know why is it important to pass legislation on immigration. Well, what you can do is get involved, and you can use your voice. And I have seen how powerful it has been to people and to even these members of Congress. I remember one, Susan Collins, which is a Republican. She said that she had her daughter during Christmas break lobbying her and telling her, look, in my class, I have some friends who are dreamers, and you have to vote for this. You have to do this. I have seen members talk about how they remember one dreamer that talked to them and shared with them their story, and they carry that person with them, and they remember that person. And so sharing your story and speaking out on this issue and talking to other people is really powerful. And if you are able to change people's hearts and minds, then it creates a wave of positivity, and it creates a wave of possibilities. So I'm always for people getting involved and using their voice, and also calling and writing their members of Congress. A lot of the time, it's just a matter of looking up who your member of Congress is. You go on Google and you say, who's my member of Congress? You put your zip code and it will tell you right away who your member of Congress is. And writing to them sometimes is as easy as going to their website, and they themselves have scripts there where you can go in and just put your contact information and your name and tell the members what's important to you. The other thing you can do is write them a snail mail letter, and actually write them a letter explaining to them and sharing your story and sending them to their local offices. And or you can also send it to their DC office for them to see it that way. And you can call them too. You can call them and say, hello, I'm so on and so forth. I just wanted to say that I really would like for you to support the DREAM Act. This legislation would be life-changing for me and my family and my community. I really would like for you to consider supporting it. And then they would ask you, your zip code. They would write it down and they would start jotting down the people that are calling or not. I have been in these offices and I have been there when legislation like the DREAM Act in 2010 was being decided. And they were tracking all this stuff. They were really seeing who was calling and seeing who was for and against it. And right now, the Alumni Council, the Alumni Network is going to be working on a letter that is going to be a sign-on letter that all of you can participate in. So be on the lookout for that, because we're going to need as many people to use their voice and to use their power of their stories to share their stories with these members of Congress. The other thing you can do is see if your college and universities are involved. See if they're part of things like the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. See if they're keeping track of this and how they're using their voice as college representatives that have large pools of dreamers in their campus, how they're using their voice to lobby and advocate for you. And then the last thing is, as I mentioned to you before, renew and keep your paperwork up to date and in order. It's really important that you do that, because you don't want to be scrambling if, knock on wood, we are able to see some legislation maybe at the end of this year, or maybe in the summer, or maybe even next year. You might want to, I don't know how many of you remember, but if you had Daca or TPS, the paperwork, and especially for Daca, the paperwork was quite extensive to put all your files and all your stuff together, to send all the information that you have lived in the country since you first came here. So you want to keep all those paperwork in order, make copies of them, put the copies in somewhere that's safe and the originals in somewhere that is safe, and then make sure that you have all your, like I said, your paperwork in order, and that you are renewing your DACA. Or if you have not had the chance to do your DACA or TPS, for you to do it now. Okay, so now we're going to go to our questions. And you can either put your questions in through the chat, or you can raise your hand, and Melanie's going to help us with the questions period now.
Thank you, Gaby, for that great presentation. We do have a couple of questions rolling in. First is from Valerie Martinez Almeida. She is asking, can we legally call other Republican representatives public office numbers to support the DREAM Act legislation?
Of course, yes. And these members of Congress are your members of Congress, and they represent you and your community. And so you can call Republicans, you can call Democrats. You might not even know it, but maybe your member is a Republican, and we need as many Republicans to support this as we can.
Okay, our next question is from Charlie Dalmas. They are asking, if you have TPS, in parentheses, Haiti, but is under deportation, parentheses, only because my mom was on it and since I was a child and they put me under two, close parentheses, is it safe to travel to another state in the US? If I am, what should I bring?
So I'm not an attorney, and I wouldn't want to give any legal advice about, should you travel or not. But just as a general concept of rules, if you have TPS, you have a temporary protected status, that should allow you to be able to move across the states without the fear of deportation, similarly to DACA. So if you have TPS, you should have that protection. Now, I would say the best thing to do is to contact an attorney and ask that question to see, especially if you have a deportation order, you might want to, just to save yourself a headache and a heartache if you were to get stopped by TSA and then they transfer you to ICE. You might want to talk to an attorney before traveling.
Thank you, Gabby. I just want to point out in our chat box, my colleague Handley mentioned that a great way to also express your voice and help us with any policies supporting Dreamers is by completing the annual Dream.Us Scholar and Alumni Survey. So just kind of keep an eye out for that. It's a great way to help us in that support. Another
question to Melanie that we have an immigration hour with an attorney, and they can always join us during that time to ask their questions. And this is a monthly thing that we have for all of our scholars. So if they have an immigration's particular question, they can always attend that and ask legal questions there.
Thank you, Gabby. Next question we have here in our chat asking, what should we do if we have a Republican representative?
So if you have a Republican representative, you become that much more important because we need Republicans to support this legislation. So if you have any relationships or you know anybody, for example, that you go to the church where that representative goes to, or you have a friend, or your college that representative went to your college that you're attending right now. Those are all great things to have on your side, and it would be great for you to build a relationship with that representative's office. And if you have a chance to tell your story, to share your story with that representative, it would be great for you to do so that we can start moving them in the right direction.
We have a question here, a pretty common question from Saad Khalil. How far before our DACA expiration should we be applying?
That's a great question. So according to USCIS, it says 120 to 150 days, but some people actually submit those a little bit earlier. You just got to know that the earlier you submit, the less time you're going to get, right? So you want to kind of gauge, and I would say you should try for sure between the 150 and 120 days. But you should also check with other folks that are doing the DACA and attorneys. Again, one, because I'm not an attorney and this is not legal advice, but also because you want to see if USCIS is taking a little bit longer to submit and to process these. Because if they are, then you might want to submit your application a little bit earlier, more closer to the 150 days, 180 days, versus closer into the 120 days where you're going to be left without your work authorization card.
This next question is from Anna, and it's a good question, one that I've had myself for when I was first applying. Would it be better to file for DACA on my own or hire an attorney? Would it be the same amount of time?
So it's the same amount of time, but what I would say is that you should always, especially if this is the first time you're going to be submitting your DACA application, that you want to have legal advice. There's actually a lot of, like the Mexican consulate does legal clinics. There's different organizations that do it for free. United We Dream tends to have clinics, and their different affiliate organizations do it. So what I would say is look for legal advice, and you can definitely find free legal advice. The clinic, the Catholic Legal Charities has legal advice that they give and provide. So if you don't have the resources to hire an attorney, look for and research the organizations that might do so and might be able to help you for free.
Thank you, Gabby. Next question is from Rosa Guerra. She's asking, is there a current delay for renewals? I submitted my application but haven't heard anything. I'm worried since I have only about a month left.
Yeah, so it depends on where you submit your renewal. Sometimes there's different centers that are taking longer than others, and also depends on where the center is. So for example, right now, if your center is the Texas center, and right now Texas is without power, those delays are going to be hurting you and others people as well. So it depends on really which center. And right now, you got to remember that things are starting to, there's been a change in administration. And so there's new bosses coming in, new processes that are going to be put in, and things are going to change now from how they used to be during the Trump administration and now with the Biden administration.
Thank you, Gabby. Our next question, and this is a good one and a common one that we've been getting lately. This one is from Jeff Gonzalez. If Joe Biden passes the law to give Daca students citizenship, what would happen to my scholarship with TheDream.Us?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you so much, Jeff, for asking it. So as you remember, we send out an email letting you all know that when that time passes, we're going to let you know and inform you of any decisions that we make. But we want you to feel reassured that we're here for you. This is one of the reasons why we're doing this presentation for you today, because we wanted to make sure that you were informed, and we wanted to make sure that you knew that we were going to support you. You are our scholar. Once I tell people, once you become a scholar, watch out, because we're going to be there like your second mom or your dad or your family there behind you, supporting you, pushing you along the way. And so once you're a scholar forever of TheDream.Us, and you'll be receiving information from us, not just on what you can be doing, example, internships and jobs during your college time, but also after you graduate with us. We're going to help you with your career and connecting you to those jobs. So once something is to happen, we'll get back to you and we'll inform you, all of you, of what the next steps were going to be.
Thank you, Gabby. This is more of a comment from, I believe, and I hope one of our alum, Luis Ursua, saying, just FYI, I am Daca and have traveled a fair amount of time since I graduated in 2018. I have not had any issues. So thank you for that comment, Luis. Our next question is from Ariadna. Which, Gabby, in your opinion, which one of the avenues for legislation that you talked about do you think has a higher possibility?
Oof, that's a hard question. I think that's probably going to be the hardest question for tonight. I honestly feel that the easiest legislation to pass is going to be something like the DREAM Act. And a smaller piece of legislation might be easier to pass because comprehensive immigration reform right now is a pretty progressive. There's no enforcement, as I mentioned, but if they do start trying to get Republican support, more than likely you are going to see enforcement. You're going to see something around the border and trying to protect the border. A lot of the things that you saw during the Trump administration, Republicans will bring those things up. The DREAM Act has been a bipartisan legislation that has passed both House and the Senate in different times. In 2010, it got the closest of passing with 55 votes. And we needed only 5 votes, which we had 5 Democrats that could have voted for it, but we weren't able to get those 5 Democrats to vote for it, or 5 Republicans. So I think the DREAM Act is the more than likely, but there's also, I forgot to mention the reconciliation bill. So reconciliation budget bills, those have to pass every year, and those are bills that they cannot be filibustered, that you can pass it with a simple majority, so the 50 votes plus 1. So there has been conversations about using the reconciliation process in order to pass a smaller chunk that might be kind of maybe documented individuals or TPS individuals or agriculture individuals tag along to that bill and pass along with it in order to get a smaller portion of the population legalized. So I would say that those are the 2 possibilities, and there will be a reconciliation bill coming up pretty soon. I think because of what's happening in the country with COVID and what's happening with our economy, more than likely, they're not going to want to tag anything that deals with immigration because it'll be too controversial. But there will be another reconciliation bill sometime in the summer, and maybe that's when they'll put something along with it. Now, I want to make sure that I'm putting expectations correctly, because unfortunately, there is different types of population of dreamers. You have dreamers with Daca, you have dreamers with TPS, you have dreamers who are undocumented. You have dreamers that are not that have not been able to apply for DACA but are DACA eligible. And you have dreamers who have aged out of any of the DREAM Act legislation because they, aged out. So when I talk about this different population, I usually try to be as specific as possible. And I think that in the reconciliation process, there might want to just do the documented individual dreamers. So that means the more or less 700,000 young people who have this program would be the ones that would be eligible to get some sort of relief if they were to pass it forward. Then the DREAM Act, that expands the dreamer population to about 1.4, 1.7 million, but it does not include people with TPS. And it is only the Secure Act and the Promise and Dream Act of HR 6 in the House that includes both dreamers with DACA, TPS, and those without DACA.
Thank you, Gabby. So I'm seeing here in the chat box, we have a lot of DACA questions. Some that if you can shed some light on, for example, we have a lot of first timers this time around that are applying, and some are asking if it's safe to apply, and I guess just the basic process. And it is a long, extensive process, but I guess more than anything, just if you could elaborate on that now is the time to apply for DACA if they're eligible, especially for the first time. And thank you to my colleagues who put our immigration hours, resources, and links to any kind of like DACA question specifically. But if you can kind of elaborate on that, Gabby, that would be great.
Sure. So it depends, as I said, on the processing center, but it usually takes a couple of months for the DACA process to go through. And so, especially if you're a first time applying, it's going to take a little bit longer. So I would say, start putting all your paperwork together and apply as soon as possible so that you can get your DACA in place before anything is to happen. Now, I don't necessarily think anything bad is going to happen, but good things could potentially happen. So you want to be able to potentially be eligible for relief if there was to, like I said, a reconciliation package that they put people who have DACA to be able to get expedited green cards, for example, which is one of the conversations that the U.S. and Citizenship Act bill is having, or the members who are putting that together, they're having to be able to have an expedited path just for those that have DACA, TPS, and are agriculture workers. There are a lot of resources. There are not as many resources as there used to be to pay for the renewal fee or the DACA fee, but reach out to us and then we can give you some of those resources as well if you don't have that. Now, what would happen to the parents of DACA? That's another question that we usually get a lot of the time. Those people that are parents would be eligible in the bigger comprehensive immigration reform package. They have not had any conversation or any talk about doing anything similar to what the Obama administration did, the DAPA program through the executive action, the deferred action for parents of US citizen children. But the comprehensive immigration reform bigger package will help those families that have undocumented adults.
Thank you, Gabby. That was really insightful in the way you said it. Our next question here is from Daniel Negrete, asking, does Biden's recent data fortification reinstate advanced parole that was scrapped under the Trump administration?
Yes, that's another one of those things that fortified DACA. So advanced parole is back into place. And so there has already been conversations. I know colleges have started to talk about potentially reopening their, what is this called again? Study abroad programs. And also there has been as well different organizations that have talked about doing trips to Mexico and other parts of the country, of the world, sorry.
Thank you, Gabby. This question is from, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Jiang Li. Will DACA with higher degrees likely to get a green card first in line?
So if for the DREAM Act, it's not that you get first in line, but you will fulfill the DACA, not the DACA, sorry, the DREAM Act eligibility criteria sooner. So yes, having a degree actually helps you a lot if if the DREAM Act was to, for example, pass. Yes, that's a great question.
Thank you. Just looking at other questions that are coming in.
And yes, sometimes DACA gets auto-corrected to data.
Let's see. A lot of these are pertaining to specific questions regarding DACA, the process, resources for the fee, the eligibility criteria, which are my colleagues Candy and Hain and Tanya are gracefully answering. Thank you so much. We have one here from Hania Godinez. How safe is it to travel with advanced parole as a DACA recipient? Have you, Gabby, is it okay if I ask, are you a DACA recipient yourself, or do you know of any who have done the advanced parole program?
Formerly a DACA recipient, and I traveled twice with advanced parole. And it was a fairly difficult process actually to get my advanced parole. The first time I did it through educational purposes, and that one was actually easy because we went with the Mexican ambassadors and embassy. They brought a group of 40 dreamers to Mexico, and we were there for, I think was maybe 7 days or 5 days, I can't really remember, but we were there as kind of like an exchange program where we were learning about Mexico and the roots, and people were also sharing what we had learned as activists to other activists in Mexico, to Mexican activists. And that was a fairly easy process because we had the government of Mexico working with us to help put that process together. On the way back, it was a little bit scary because the CBP agents were mean and did try to kind of scare us a little bit. But because we were going in a group and because we kind of all knew our rights, we knew not to let them bother us. The second time I did it under the humanitarian reason because my grandmother was sick and she was dying. And that process was a very difficult process to do. The first time I got denied, the second time I was approved. And then I went to Ecuador for 3 days before my grandmother passed away. So what I would say is that it's still a risk. They can tell you they won't let you back in, but more than likely, I've seen hundreds of people travel with advanced parole, and it has been a smooth process. Like I said, my process was I've had three different times, twice that I got to go and once that I got denied. And on the way back, the third time, it was fairly easy for me to come back into the country.
Thank you, Gabby. We do have Jiang Li in the comments saying, I'm so sorry to hear about your grandmother. Thank you for telling us that. We do have a question here from Daphne Dillis asking, what is happening with Haiti and TPS?
Sure. So those that have TPS that are from Haiti have had TPS for a long time, since 2010 earthquake. But there were people that have come to the US after that. And like DACA and like other legislation, if you come after a certain period of time, then you're not eligible to apply because you needed to be in the country before that. So unfortunately, we have had a lot of Haitian individuals that have come to the US after the fact that TPS was announced, and they're not eligible for TPS. And what's happening to them is that they're being deported. And so I actually live in Miami, where there's a large community of Haitian folks living here. And this is something that we have been seeing for many, many years. I remember boats of Haitians coming into our shores, similarly to how we've seen boats of Cuban coming into the shores, and the Cuban folks got to stay because there's a rule, a law called the wet foot, dry foot, that as long as you have 1 foot on the ground here, and you touch land, then you're eligible to stay. And in a year, you actually get to get a green card. But it was very sad to see that our Haitian brothers and sisters weren't able to stay. And even though there was the president, one of his presidential memorandums was to stop deportations within 100 days, there was a lawsuit that was put into place which stopped that. So, like I said at the beginning, there's so much. And even though we have a completely new administration with a new tone and a new respect for immigrants, different than what we had seen from the Trump administration, you have a lot of rogue as ICE agents, CBP officers, and folks on the ground who don't necessarily care for or want to admit or follow the rules. So it's going to be a difficult task, and it's going to take some time for the administration to clean house and make sure that they're following the rules, and that the priorities, because that was another thing. There's also a priority for who can be deported or who should be deported or not.
Got it. And I do have a lot of comments here, commenting saying, how are these deportations still happening? And so kind of going back to a little bit about the advanced parole questions. Andrea Cejas is asking, are they allowed to not let you back into the country on advanced parole?
So technically, advance parole is a discretionary document that you get, so they can potentially not let you back in. But I have not seen or have heard of any cases of anybody that has not been let back in.
Got it. I have one more question from Dominic Ewing, asking, would there be a chance that Biden would expand Daca for individuals who didn't qualify for it because of the June 15, 2007 deadline?
So that is such a great question. So because they don't want to have, if they were to make any changes to the DACA program, if Biden was to expand it, they open themselves a can of worms, practically. Pandora's box opens up again, and there's potential for new litigation. And so since they already went through that, they don't want to go through that again, because they know that if they were to go to the Supreme Court, more than likely the DACA program is not going to be able to make it. Because you got to remember, during that time, there was a split 4-4 vote. And so we were able to save ourselves from losing our DACA program because they didn't want to make a decision on it. But now that the courts are more conservative, there is an opportunity, if they were to change the DACA program, to reopen that again and have another chance for litigation to be brought up, and then it would move up to the Supreme Court, and potentially we can lose the whole entire program. So that's one of the reasons why you're probably not going to see any of the DACA legislation, DACA executive actions to change any of the dates or number of people, because it can potentially open up for new litigation.
Thank you. We do have a question from Camille Aguiluz. Since Gaby, you are our Miami native, she's asking, is there any organizations of DACA in Miami that I can participate?
So yes, there actually is going to be a summit happening next week on the 25th. Impact is doing that, and they're bringing Republicans and Democrats together to talk about the need for immigration reform. There's the Florida Immigrant Coalition. There's Americans for Immigrant Justice that provides legal support for those that don't have resources. And then as well, there's a student organization that is under the Florida Immigrant Coalition that you can call them, and if you want to participate, you can do so there as well.
Perfect, thank you. We have a question here from Priya Parmasar, and I'm sure a lot of students have the same question in terms of timeline. Do you know how long the process would be in a pathway to, if citizenship pathway were to pass? timeline wise?
Yeah, it all depends on which legislation. So if we're talking about the US, the big comprehensive immigration bill, if you have DACA, TPS, or an ag worker, I think it said in 3 years you'll have your green card, and from there you'll have in 2 years your citizenship. You can apply for citizenship, so it can be a 5-year wait. For the DREAM Act, I think it's a 6-year process, and then after that, it's like about 10 years before you're actually a U.S. citizen with that process. The other legislations that we have not seen yet, more than likely are going to be around the same thing. But what I tell folks all the time is if the DREAM Act would have passed in 2010, today, every single one of us would have been a citizen by now. And every single one of us would have been able to start petitioning for our parents and our families if we would have had that citizenship. So we got to think long term as we're looking at these legislations, because a lot of the times we might say, well, I don't want comprehensive immigration reform to happen without, or I don't want the DREAM Act to happen without comprehensive immigration reform. But likelihood of comprehensive immigration reform is way smaller than the likelihood of the DREAM Act passing, right? So you have to kind of balance the legislation and decide, what might be better to actually get something passed and have a smaller population of people get some sort of status, or have something that might not necessarily pass and have nobody, get some sort of status.
So we do have a couple minutes left. If it's okay with you, Gabby, we do have a couple of hands up, just two, and we'll go with them.
Please.
Shimran, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, but if you unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
I just wanted to ask, how soon would we receive an email for those who are applying for new DACA applications regarding the check to help us with the DACA application?
And I'm not sure if Candy, if you can help me with that, answer that question, or I know Elena.
Oh, I think Elena is on and will have a more definite answer, but I think that they are processing them on a weekly basis, the applications that are coming in, and then it will take another week or so before the check actually gets sent. Elena, is that correct?
They're being processed on a 2-week basis.
2-week basis, thank you. So then a week, so it'll be about 3 weeks from the time that you actually submit your application.
Thank you, Candy. And Elena. Next, if we can, Daniel Negrete, if you can unmute your mic and ask your question, go ahead.
Hi, Gabby. I have a question regarding some of the senators and representatives that could potentially be a bit more malleable. I hate to sound cynical, but guys like Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, they seem like very adamant, staunch, anti-immigrant policy supporters. So who within, perhaps the 41 that voted to acquit Trump would be much more malleable?
Sure. So I actually have a list and I'm going to share with you my list. It's 12 members, 12 senators. And these are all Republican. So Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham, which we know he's already a supporter of the DREAM Act as he's one of the co-sponsors. Senator Tillis from North Carolina, Langford from Oklahoma, Senator Rounds from South Dakota, Senator Rubio and Senator Scott from Florida, Senator Cornyn from Texas, who has been talking a lot lately about immigration, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, Romney from Utah, Hoeven from South Dakota, Senator Ridge, and that's R-I-S-H-C-H, from Idaho, Senator Moran from Kansas, Portman from Ohio, Capito from West Virginia, and Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. Those are right now, as I've been looking at who are potential senators, Republican senators to target, those would be my list of target gettable Republicans.
Thank you, Gabby, for being so quick and handy with the list.
Mm-hmm.
So we are at the top of, or at 7 o'clock my time, and I do want to be respectful of your time. Just a quick reminder to everyone that our immigration hours, our next one is next Thursday, February 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern. The link to join is in the chat box. You received many emails and reminder emails with that link. Please join if you have any immigration questions to ask. And Gabby, if you want to close out for us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Melanie, Candy, Elena, and the rest of the team, Tanya, Hain, for helping us with this tonight, and Sadana. If I missed somebody, sorry. But thank you everyone for being with us tonight. And, let us know what you want to hear from us. Please keep engaged with us, fill out the surveys when we send them out. It's so important to hear from you. And don't forget that 1, you belong, that we care so much about you, and 3, that we're here for you. So if you need something from us, let us know. We look forward to seeing you in our next session that we're going to have. The topic, it's on you. So let us know what you want to hear from us. Take care. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gabby. You're amazing.
Good night, all. Thank you, Gabby. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.